By now, most of us that browse the internet or watch TV are probably aware of the ancient astronaut theory. But for those that are unfamiliar, the ancient astronaut theory, first proposed in the mid-20th century, is the hypothesis that intelligent extraterrestrial beings have visited Earth thousands of years ago, during the age of antiquity, and made contact with our ancestors. It's thought this contact had such an effect on the emergence of human civilizations that life from distant planets may have been responsible for the advancement of human technology and the creation of entire religions. In this video, we're going to take a look at 5 pieces of evidence that could very well prove aliens universally influenced the growth of our world as we know it. Sit back and enjoy. The Headless Spaceman. At first glance, this little stone artifact looks like a carving of some sort of ship, with a cone-shaped nose, a set of what appears to be 4 rocket engines at the rear, and a pilot in the centre. Although the pilot is missing its head, probably due to years of corrosion, and looks to be sitting in a fetal position, wearing a ribbed bodysuit, complete with boots, gloves, and what might be a breathing apparatus at his chest. This curious carving, dubbed the Headless Spaceman, was said to have been excavated in 1973 from the ruins of an ancient city known as Tushba, located in the Van province of modern-day Turkey near the border with Iran. Tushba was once the capital of the kingdom of Urtu from the 9th to the 6th centuries BC, which would date the artifact at upwards of 3,000 years old. Adding to the mystery, a massive fortress known as the Van Citadel, which overlooks the ruins of the ancient city, shows evidence of Cyclopean masonry. This kind of stonework uses no brick and mortar, and instead uses massive boulders and large stones, carefully fitted together to construct large, defensive fortifications or large structures. Cyclopean masonry is commonly found in areas suspected to have been visited by extraterrestrials in the ancient past, such as Egypt, Greece, and Peru. After its discovery, it was generally agreed that the Headless Spaceman had been given to the Istanbul Archaeological Museum by an antique merchant, where it was kept hidden away in the preservation unit because the museum curator assumed it was nothing more than a hoax. However, this didn't stop a leading authority and scholar on the ancient astronaut theory, who in 1997 tracked down the whereabouts of this mysterious artifact and convinced the curator to unveil it to Western media. The Headless Spaceman soon made headlines in the United States and across Europe, but the excitement was short-lived when in 2003 scientists concluded that the Headless Spaceman was no more than 25 years old and made from simple plaster and marble dust. Despite this, it hasn't stopped many from believing it to be a genuine piece of history that ultimately proves life from another world may have visited us in the ancient past, and this has been covered up by saying that it is no more than 25 years old. What do you think? The Baghdad Battery. In the early 1900s, many scientists from the most prominent empires of Europe were excavating ancient cities looking for proof of biblical relics. And whilst there are differing opinions on how this item was discovered, it's widely agreed German archaeologist Wilhelm Koning unearthed it in 1938 at an excavation site just outside the modern city of Baghdad in Iraq, and he believed it to be an ancient battery. After he examined the 5-inch or 13-centimeter long vessel, he found it contained an iron rod encased in a copper cylinder, as well as traces of an acidic agent, which he assumed could have been wine or vinegar. However, just as he emerged to publish his findings, the Second World War broke out in Europe, and the discovery was quickly forgotten. But long after the war had ended, the Baghdad Battery was rediscovered and carefully examined by scientists. It was estimated that the battery was produced sometime around 200 BC. After the discovery, several replicas were made, and when tested, could generate between 0.8 to nearly 2 volts of electric power. Although this voltage may seem insignificant by modern standards, if multiple batteries were connected to one another by a wire, this theoretically could generate a much higher voltage. Although no wires have been excavated to support this idea, debate continues over the purpose of the battery. Some think it could have been used for medical purposes, to dull physical pain or discomfort, although there's no evidence to suggest this, as it was well recorded in the ancient world that cannabis and opium were relied upon as painkillers. Others believe the battery may have been used for religious rituals, and the battery was placed inside of a hollow idol or statue, and when touched would produce a very small shock, fooling the individual into believing it was a divine experience. Today, most archaeologists agree that the Baghdad battery is not a battery at all, and that the vessel and innards resemble other artifacts found in nearby excavation sites that were used to store scrolls. They also claim that the acidic substance found within the vessel could easily be the disintegrated scrolls that were once housed within. But have they got it wrong, and could the Baghdad battery have actually been used to generate electric power? And if so, how did the ancients acquire the knowledge to produce it, and for what purpose did they need it? You decide. Sanskrit texts. The subcontinent of India has one of the richest cultures in the world, with a vast history that spans over 9,000 years. Some of the oldest surviving texts are known as the Sanskrit epics, which contain stories and poetry, and is the central aspect of Indian culture. But there is one in particular that, if read with a 21st century lens, seems to describe the use of aeronautical technology in detail. Among the very oldest of the Sanskrit texts, dating back to nearly 4000 BC, is the Vedas, which comes from the word Veda, meaning knowledge or wisdom, which is then subdivided into 4 categories. Each of these categories contains different writings on mantras, rituals, sacrifices, ceremonies, meditation and worship. And among the spiritual knowledge can be found what is described as flying chariots or palaces, known as the Vimana. It is said that these flying machines could carry an occupant or occupants through the air, and were considered aerial thrones. Some describe them as 7 stories tall. Smaller Vimana were described with wings taking on the heavenly shape of an eagle, and could be piloted by one person. In this section of the text, there are what are named as 32 secrets of working a Vimana. Some of these secrets include how to properly operate the switches of the Vimana, the differences in altitude within the atmosphere, how to camouflage it whilst it's in the air, how to paralyze enemy Vimana, and what to do in case of an onboard fire. There are even texts suggesting that the pilots of the Vimana aircraft were capable of what we today would call radar and radio communication. It's documented that when the Vimana aircraft took off, they followed smoke and fire. It could ascend and descend vertically and travel through the air at great speed. There are also passages about these ancient aircraft equipped with advanced weaponry. One of the Sanskrit texts, the Mahabharata, details an observation of such weapons in use, stating this: "It was an unknown weapon, an Aya thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Andakas. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves in streams to wash themselves and their equipment." To the modern reader, this description is reminiscent of the effects of the nuclear bombs used on Japan in 1945. Strangely enough, there are also traces of high levels of radiation in remote ancient sites such as the Mohenjo-Daro in modern-day Pakistan and Rajasthan in India. How could ancient people who lived thousands of years before the supposed invention of the aeroplane have acquired knowledge of advanced aeronautics? And could they have had the tools necessary to build the Vimana themselves? What do you think? Gate of the Sun. There are many ancient structures across the world that are shrouded in mystery, from the pyramids of Egypt to Stonehenge in England. Hundreds of people have dedicated their lives to uncovering the enigmas that riddle these places of wonder. But for now we take a look at one of the lesser known ancient structures that may shed light on the ancient astronaut theory. In the 1500s, Spanish explorers discovered a magnificent stone monolith in the shape of an archway or gateway. It is located on the western edges of Bolivia, almost 13,000 feet above sea level, at the site known as Tiwanaku. It stands 9.8 feet tall, 13 feet wide, and is estimated to weigh almost 10 tons. Carved near the top are 48 squares. 32 of them are effigy carvings that have human faces, while 16 have the head shape of a condor. All of them appear to have wings and surround a centerpiece of what archaeologists have considered to be a sun god, due to 24 rays expanding from the figure's head. There is debate among scholars about how old the Gate of the Sun is. Some suggest a more conservative estimate of around 3,000 years, while others claim it was built 14,000 years ago. There is also the debate about its purpose. Some advocates of the ancient astronaut theory believe it could be a calendar for another planet. Others think that it isn't a calendar about time at all, but instead depicts the movements of the Earth in relation to the universe. It was determined that the people who once lived there were capable of advanced mathematics, insofar as calculating the Earth on its axis, and could accurately predict the coming of eclipses, no matter the side of the hemisphere. According to the book Chariots of the Gods, Eric von Daniken claimed there is a local legend about the mysterious city. He writes, it tells of a golden spaceship that came from the stars. In it came a woman whose name was Oriana. To fulfill the task of becoming the Great Mother of Earth, Oriana had only 4 fingers, which were webbed. Great Mother Oriana gave birth to 70 Earth children. Then she returned to the stars. He confirms this legend after finding rock drawings at the city that depict beings with 4 fingers. The Book of Genesis. No video discussing the ancient astronaut theory would be complete without some mention of the Bible, and a few of the peculiar passages within it. While we could make an entire video dedicated to the ancient mysteries of the Bible and other religious books, for now we're going to be looking specifically at a few quotes from the Book of Genesis. This is not to offend anyone or their beliefs, it's just to highlight a different interpretation of what was written hundreds of years ago. The Book of Genesis is the biblical story of creation, which tells of God as a spirit within an empty void of nothing, where he calls into being light, the sky, the world, and everything on and around it. With Genesis 1:26, we find this quote, "And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness." This raises the question, why would a singular deity speak in the plural? Could God have been just one of many who visited our ancient ancestors and helped humanity by advancing us forward through the use of genetic or technological means? Further on, in Genesis 6:1-2, we find this quote, "And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they choose. It is later said that the children born to those coupling were great heroes of old, renowned for their skill as warriors." If we interpretate this passage through the ancient astronaut theory, we find ourselves wondering if humans and beings from space interbred and conceived some sort of hybrid race, or could it have been an ancient metaphor for genetic experimentation? Lastly, we would like to talk about Genesis 19:1-28, which may relate to what was recorded in the Sanskrit texts we discussed earlier. Within these passages, we find the tale of Lot. To summarize, it's a story about 2 angels that travel to the ancient and infamous city of Sodom, where they encounter a man named Lot, who shows them great hospitality by letting the 2 angels rest at his home for the night. Because of such a kind gesture within a city known for its rampant sin, the angels warn Lot of the coming divine judgment to be had upon the people of Sodom, and tell him to take his family far away from the city. At first, the family is unwilling to believe the so-called angels, but the next morning, the angels hasten Lot, tell him to take his wife and 2 daughters into the nearby mountains where they will be safe. Later, judgment really had come to pass, and the city, as well as its people, had been completely destroyed by fire and brimstone. Could it be that the people of Sodom had experienced the same kind of advanced technology as that of Hindu people of ancient India? It's a very interesting take on it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.